The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement of the quiet suburban neighborhood. Mrs. Evelyn Carter adjusted the wide-brimmed hat on her head, shielding her eyes from the glare as she watered the vibrant petunias lining her front porch. At 72, she moved with the deliberate grace of a woman who had spent decades tending to her home and her family. Her hands, though wrinkled, were steady, and her dark eyes held a quiet strength. A patrol car rolled slowly down the street, its engine a low hum. Inside, Officer Daniel Grayson drummed his fingers against the steering wheel, his sharp blue eyes scanning the sidewalks with practiced suspicion. He had been on the force for 15 years, and in that time, he had developed a reputation. Some called him diligent, others called him ruthless. But in his mind, he was just doing his job. His gaze landed on Mrs. Carter, and his lips curled into a smirk. He had seen her before, always outside, always tending to her garden like she owned the whole block. Something about her ease, her comfort in a neighborhood that had only recently begun to change, rubbed him the wrong way. Grayson pulled the car to a stop in front of her house and stepped out, adjusting his belt with an air of authority. Mrs. Carter glanced up, her expression neutral but her posture stiffening slightly. She had lived long enough to recognize the look in his eyes. "Afternoon, ma'am," Grayson said, though his tone lacked warmth. "Good afternoon, officer," she replied, her voice steady. He gestured to the hose in her hand. "You know there's a water restriction in effect, right? No unnecessary use." Mrs. Carter frowned. "I wasn't aware. The notice must have slipped by me." Grayson's smirk deepened. "Ignorance isn't an excuse. That's a finable offense." She turned off the water, her movements slow and deliberate. "I understand. It won't happen again." But Grayson wasn't done. He stepped closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. "You people always say that, don't you? It won't happen again. But it always does." Mrs. Carter's eyes flashed, but she kept her voice calm. "I assure you, officer, I'll be more mindful." Something in her composure, the way she refused to shrink under his gaze, irritated him. Without thinking, he snatched the hose from her hands and turned it on full blast, dousing her from head to toe. The icy water soaked through her floral dress, plastering it to her skin. For a moment, there was only the sound of the water splashing against the pavement, and Mrs. Carter's sharp intake of breath. Then, Grayson laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "There. Now you won't forget." Mrs. Carter stood frozen, water dripping from her chin, her fists clenched at her sides. But she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just stared at him, her gaze so piercing that, for the first time in a long while, Grayson felt a flicker of unease. A neighbor across the street gasped, pulling out a phone to record, but Grayson barely noticed. He tossed the hose onto the lawn and turned back to his car, calling over his shoulder, "Consider this a warning." As he drove off, he didn't see Mrs. Carter slowly straightening her spine, her expression hardening into something unreadable, and he certainly didn't see her pull out her own phone, dialing a number with practiced ease. The voice on the other end answered immediately. "Mom? Everything all right?" Her son's voice, deep, commanding, sent a wave of calm through her, but her words were anything but calm. "Marcus," she said quietly, "we need to talk." And Officer Grayson, blissfully unaware, continued his patrol, never suspecting that the elderly woman he had just humiliated was the mother of Marcus Carter Thay, newly appointed chief of police. The water dripped from Mrs. Evelyn Carter's dress, pooling at her feet as she stood motionless on the porch. Her fingers trembled not from the cold, but from the slow-burning fury coiling in her chest. She had lived through segregation, through the civil rights marches, through decades of quiet resilience. She had taught her children to hold their heads high, to meet ignorance with dignity. But this was different. This was a deliberate act of cruelty, and it demanded more than silence. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before lifting the phone back to her ear. Marcus was still on the line, his voice edged with concern. "Mom, talk to me. What happened?" Evelyn exhaled slowly. "A police officer just assaulted me, Marcus, on my own property." There was a beat of silence. Then, low and dangerous, Marcus asked, "Who?" "I don't know his name. White, mid-40s, buzz cut. Drives car number 147. Her voice was calm, but beneath it, steel. Marcus let out a slow breath. I'll handle it. Evelyn knew that tone. It was the same one he'd used as a boy when someone had tried to bully his younger sister. It was the same one he'd used as a young officer when he'd stood up against corruption in the ranks. Now, as chief of police, it carried weight. Real weight. Marcus, she said carefully, don't do anything reckless. I won't, he replied. But this ends today. The call disconnected, and Evelyn finally stepped inside, peeling off her soaked dress and wrapping herself in a thick robe. She moved to the window, watching as the neighbor across the street, Mrs. Thompson, a kind-faced woman in her 60s, hurried over, clutching her phone. Evelyn, my God, are you all right? I got it all on video. That officer had no right. Evelyn forced a small smile. I'll be fine, Helen. But thank you. That footage might be important. Helen's hands shook as she handed over the phone. I've seen him around before. Grayson, he's always been aggressive. But this? She shook her head. This was hateful. Evelyn took the phone, watching the playback. There it was, Grayson's sneer, the way he'd snatched the hose, the cruel laughter as he drenched her. Her stomach twisted, but her resolve hardened. I'll make sure this gets where it needs to go, Evelyn said quietly. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus Carter stood in his office, staring at the personnel file in his hands. Officer Daniel Grayson. 15 years on the force. Multiple complaints, excessive force, racial profiling, verbal abuse, all buried, all swept under the rug by the old regime. Marcus's jaw tightened. He had been appointed chief to clean up the department, to restore trust between the police and the community, and now this. He picked up his desk phone and dialed Internal Affairs. Lieutenant Briggs, my office. Now. Grayson hadn't thought much about the incident after driving away. In his mind, it was just another day, another small reminder to the neighborhood that he was in control. He parked outside a diner, smirking as he walked in, nodding at the waitress who knew better than to keep him waiting. His phone buzzed. A text from his partner, Rick. Heard you had some fun today. Grayson chuckled, typing back, just keeping the streets in check. He didn't notice the two men in suits entering the diner until they were standing right beside his booth. Officer Grayson? The taller one said, flipping open a badge. Internal Affairs. We need you to come with us. Grayson's grin faded. What the hell for? The second man leaned in, his voice low. Assault on an elderly woman. And trust me, you're gonna want to cooperate. Grayson scoffed. That old lady? She was wasting water. I gave her a warning. The taller agent's expression didn't change. You're entitled to your version of events. But first, you're coming downtown. The diner had gone quiet. Patrons stared. The waitress quickly looked away. Grayson's pulse jumped, but he forced a smirk. Fine, but this is a waste of time. As he was let out, he still didn't grasp the gravity of the situation. He didn't know about the video. He didn't know about Marcus Carter. And he certainly didn't know that by the end of the day, his badge and his freedom would be hanging by a thread. Back at the precinct, Marcus stood before a wall of screens, watching the footage of Grayson dousing his mother. His fists clenched at his sides. Briggs, the head of Internal Affairs, cleared his throat. Chief, we've had complaints about Grayson for years, but nothing. Marcus cut in. This ends now. Suspend him. Launch a full investigation. And I want every case he's ever touched reviewed. Briggs hesitated. Some of the old guard aren't gonna like this. Grayson's got friends. Marcus turned, his gaze icy. Then they can join him in unemployment. The door opened, and Grayson was marched in, his cuffs clicking as he was seated in an interrogation room. Through the one-way glass, Marcus studied him, the arrogance, still there. The utter lack of remorse. Briggs handed Marcus a file. He's got a history, Chief. But he's also got union protection. We'll need airtight evidence. Marcus didn't take his eyes off Grayson. Oh, we'll get it. Then he stepped into the interrogation room. Grayson looked up, recognition flashing in his eyes. Then confusion. Then, slowly, dawning horror. Because standing before him wasn't just any officer, it was the chief of police. And he had just assaulted his mother. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the interrogation room. casting harsh shadows across Officer Daniel Grayson's face. He shifted in his seat, the metal cuffs around his wrists clinking against the table. He had been in this room before plenty of times, but never on this side of the table. The reality of the situation was starting to sink in, but his arrogance still clung to him like a second skin. Then the door opened. Marcus Carter stepped inside, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak at first, just placed a file on the table and sat down across from Grayson. His dark eyes locked onto him with an intensity that made the officer's throat tighten. Grayson forced a smirk. "So, the chief himself comes down to handle little old me. Must be my lucky day." Marcus didn't react. He simply flipped open the file, revealing a photograph of Evelyn Carter, drenched and standing on her porch. The image was sharp, the humiliation unmistakable. Grayson's smirk faltered. "You know who that is?" Marcus asked, his voice low and controlled. Grayson shrugged. "Some old lady wasting city water. I gave her a warning." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "That old lady is my mother." The words hit Grayson like a punch to the gut. His face drained of color. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar fear. Marcus watched the realization dawn in Grayson's eyes, the way his fingers twitched against the table. "Two didn't know," Grayson stammered. "Would it have mattered if you did?" Marcus asked, his tone dangerously calm. Grayson opened his mouth, then closed it. The truth was, no, it wouldn't have. He had acted on instinct, on the ingrained belief that he could do whatever he wanted to people like Evelyn Carter. And now, that belief was about to destroy him. Marcus pushed another document across the tabla list of complaints against Grayson, stretching back years. Excessive force, racial profiling, verbal abuse, all buried. "Until now. You've been a problem for a long time, Grayson," Marcus said. "And today, you made it personal." Grayson's pulse pounded in his ears. "You can't just fire me over this. I've got rights. Union protection." Marcus almost smiled. "Oh, you're not just getting fired." He tapped the file. "This is going public. Every complaint, every incident. And that video of you assaulting an elderly woman? It's already circulating." Grayson's stomach dropped. "You're bluffing." Marcus stood, straightening his jacket. "Try me." He turned and walked out, leaving Grayson alone with the weight of his own mistakes. Outside the precinct, the media had already gathered. News vans lined the street, reporters speaking into cameras about the shocking footage of a police officer assaulting a senior citizen. The video had gone viral within hours, shared thousands of times, accompanied by outrage and demands for justice. Marcus stepped onto the podium, facing the crowd. Microphones were thrust toward him, cameras flashing. He didn't need notes. He had spent his entire career preparing for this moment, not just as a cop, but as a black man who had seen too much injustice go unchecked. "Today," he began, his voice carrying across the crowd, "a member of this department committed an act of cruelty and humiliation against an innocent woman. That woman is my mother." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. "But this isn't just about her. It's about every person who has ever been targeted, harassed, or abused by those sworn to protect them." He held up the file. "Officer Grayson has a history of misconduct, and for too long, the system protected him. That ends now." He detailed the immediate suspension, the internal investigation, the review of every case Grayson had ever touched. Then he took a breath. "And to my mother," he said, his voice softening just slightly, "I'm sorry you had to endure this, but your strength has always been my inspiration. And today, you've reminded this city what real courage looks like." The crowd erupted in applause. But Marcus wasn't done. Evelyn sat in her living room, watching the press conference on television. Helen was beside her, gripping her hand. "You raised a good man, Evelyn," Helen whispered. Evelyn nodded, but her eyes were fixed on the screen. She knew her son, and she knew this was only the beginning. Grayson sat in his cell, staring at the small television mounted in the corner of the precinct's holding area. The news played on Aloof's face, his actions, Marcus's speech. His phone call to the union rep had been less than reassuring. "We'll fight it," the man had said, but there was hesitation in his voice. Then the cell door opened. It wasn't his lawyer. It was Rick, his partner. Rick looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. You really screwed up, man, Grayson scoffed. You here to lecture me? Rick shook his head. I'm here to tell you they're digging into everything. Every arrest, every report. And if they find even a fraction of what I think they will? He met Grayson's eyes. You're going away for a long time. Grayson's bravado cracked. You're supposed to have my back. Rick's expression hardened. Not like this. Then he walked out, leaving Grayson alone with the crushing truth he had no allies left. That night, Marcus sat at his mother's kitchen table, the weight of the day pressing down on him. Evelyn placed a cup of tea in front of him, then sat across from him. You did good today, she said softly. Marcus rubbed his temples. It's not enough. One bad cop gone doesn't fix the system. Evelyn reached across the table, squeezing his hand. Number the baker it is. But it's a start. Marcus looked at her, at the quiet strength in her eyes, and nodded, because he knew the fight wasn't over. And Grayson? Grayson was just the beginning. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Evelyn Carter's kitchen, casting golden stripes across the worn wooden table. She sat with her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea, the events of the previous days still pressing against her thoughts like a storm cloud. The news played softly on the radio updates about the scandal, the protests outside the precinct, the calls for broader police reform. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She rose, smoothing her housecoat, and opened the door to find a young black woman standing on her porch, her expression a mix of determination and nervous energy. She couldn't have been older than 25, dressed in a crisp blazer, with a press badge dangling from her neck. Mrs. Carter? The woman asked. I'm Naomi Ellis, with the Daily Sentinel. I was hoping I could speak with you about what happened. Evelyn studied her for a moment. She had spent a lifetime avoiding the spotlight, but something in Naomi's eyes reminded her of herself at that age full of fire, unwilling to back down. She stepped aside. Come in. Naomi sat at the kitchen table, her notepad ready, but she didn't immediately start taking notes. Instead, she said, First, I just want to say how sorry I am for what you went through. Evelyn nodded. Thank you, child. But I'm not the first, and I won't be the last. Naomi leaned forward. That's why I'm here. This story isn't just about one officer. It's about the system that let him get away with it for so long. Evelyn sipped her tea. You're not just here for a quote, are you? Naomi shook her head. Number? I've been investigating Grayson for months. He's been named in multiple complaints, but they were all buried. And he's not the only one. Evelyn's gaze sharpened. You think this goes higher up? I know it does, Naomi said. But I need someone with credibility to help me bring it to light. Someone like you. Evelyn exhaled slowly. She had spent her life staying out of trouble, keeping her head down. But maybe it was time to stop being silent. Tell me what you need, she said. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in his office, staring at the mountain of files on his desk, each one a case Grayson had touched. His phone buzzed. A text from his deputy. Unions filing a grievance. They're calling Grayson's suspension political. Marcus clenched his jaw. Of course they were. The old guard wasn't going down without a fight. He picked up his desk phone and dialed the mayor's office. Mayor Henley, came the crisp reply. Sir, we need to talk, Marcus said. This isn't just about Grayson anymore. It's about the whole department. There was a pause. Then Henley sighed. I know, my office is getting flooded with calls. Meet me in an hour. As Marcus hung up, his assistant rushed in. Chief, you need to see this. She handed him a tablet. On the screen was a live feed from City Hall, a crowd of protesters, their signs reading, Justice for Evelyn and End Police Brutality. Leading them was Naomi Ellis, microphone in hand, speaking passionately to the cameras. And standing beside her, head held high, was Evelyn. Marcus's chest tightened. His mother had never been one for protests, for making waves, but there she was, stepping into the fire. He grabbed his coat. I'm going down there. Grayson sat in his cramped apartment, blinds drawn, the television muted as the news played footage of the protests. His lawyer had told him to lay low, but the walls were closing in. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered, voice rough. Yeah? Grayson. The voice was familiar. Captain Ray Walsh, his old mentor. Cap, Grayson said, sitting up. You seen this shit? They're making me out to be some kind of monster. Walsh's tone was grim. You screwed up, and now Carter's using you to clean house. Grayson's stomach twisted. You gotta help me. You know how this game works. A long silence. Then Walsh said, There's a way out, but you're not gonna like it. Grayson's grip tightened on the phone. I'm listening. At City Hall, the crowd roared as Evelyn stepped to the microphone. She had never been one for speeches, but the words came to her now, clear and strong. I've lived in this city for 50 years, she said, her voice carrying over the sea of faces. I've seen it change, but some things stay the same. The fear, the injustice, the way some people think they can treat others like they're nothing. She paused, looking out at the crowd. But today, we say enough. Not just for me, for every person who's ever been pushed down and told to stay there. The crowd erupted in cheers. Marcus, standing at the edge of the stage, felt a surge of pride. Then, his radio crackled. Chief, we've got a problem. He turned away, pressing the receiver to his ear. What is it? Grayson's missing, and we just got a tiff he's armed. Marcus's blood ran cold. His eyes snapped to his mother, still speaking at the podium, unaware of the danger. Lock down City Hall, he ordered. Now. Grayson moved through the Grayson-by-Prompson.org back alleys, his hood pulled low, the weight of the gun in his jacket, a constant reminder of what he had to do. Walsh's words echoed in his head. You want out of this? You make sure Carter can't use you to take down the rest of us. He didn't plan to walk away from this. But if he was going down, he wasn't going alone. He slipped into the crowd, his eyes locked on Evelyn. Marcus pushed through the protesters, his heart pounding. He had to get to his mother. Then he saw him, Grayson, edging closer to the stage, his hand in his jacket. Marcus didn't think. He ran. Evelyn was just finishing her speech when she saw the commotion in the crowd. Then she saw Marcus, shoving people aside, his face a mask of terror. And then she saw Grayson. Their eyes met. Time seemed to slow. Grayson's hand moved. Marcus lunged. A gunshot rang out. The crowd screamed. And then silence. The gunshot echoed across the plaza. A single, deafening crack that sent the crowd into chaos. People screamed, ducking for cover as panic rippled through the square. Evelyn stood frozen on the stage, her heart hammering against her ribs, but she felt no pain only the crushing realization that Grayson had just fired. Then she saw Marcus. He had tackled Grayson to the ground just as the gun went off, wrestling the weapon from his grip. Two officers rushed forward, yanking Grayson up as he snarled, his face twisted with rage. The bullet had missed-embedded in the podium just inches from where Evelyn had been standing. Marcus turned, his eyes wild as they locked onto his mother. Are you hit? She shook her head, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. I'm fine. The crowd, realizing what had nearly happened, erupted in fury. Chants of no justice, no peace, rose like thunder as officers dragged Grayson away, his shouts lost in the uproar. Naomi Ellis pushed through the sea of people, her press badge glinting in the sunlight. Mrs. Carter, she began, but Evelyn held up a hand. Not now, she said quietly. Then, louder to the crowd, this is why we're here. This is why we fight. The protesters roared in response, their voices merging into a single, unshakable demand for change. 2 weeks later, the city had transformed in the days following the shooting. Grayson's arrest had been the spark that ignited long-simmering tensions, and now, the calls for reform could no longer be ignored. Marcus sat in the mayor's office, the weight of the past weeks heavy on his shoulders. Across from him, Mayor Henley sighed, rubbing his temples. It's done, Henley said. The city council approved the reforms. Independent oversight, body cameras mandated for all officers, a full review of past misconduct cases. He met Marcus's gaze. You got what you wanted. Marcus leaned back in his chair. It's not about what I want. It's about what this city needs. Henley nodded. And Grayson? Facing attempted murder charges, Marcus said flatly, along with half a dozen other officers tied to the cover-ups. Walsh, too. Henley exhaled. Hell of a way to clean house. Marcus stood, adjusting his uniform. It was overdue. Evelyn's house was full of life that evening. Friends, neighbors, even strangers who had been inspired by her courage, filled her living room, sharing food and laughter. Naomi sat at the kitchen table, typing up the final draft of her explosive report tone that would ensure Grayson's crimes, and the system that protected him, were exposed for good. Marcus arrived late, still in uniform, and the room quieted as he entered. Evelyn crossed to him, cupping his face in her hands. "You did good," she murmured. He shook his head. "We did good," she smiled, then turned to the room. "Y'all keep celebrating. I'm gonna sit a spell." She moved to the porch, settling into her favorite rocking chair. The night air was cool, the stars bright overhead. Marcus joined her after a while, sitting beside her in silence. "You think it'll last?" she asked softly. "The changes?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "I don't know, but we'll keep fighting." Evelyn nodded, satisfied. That was all anyone could do. Epilogue. 3 months later, Grayson was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Captain Walsh and 4 other officers were convicted of obstruction of justice. The reforms held, and for the first time in years, the city began to heal. Marcus stood at a podium, newly re-elected as chief, and announced the launch of a community outreach program that would bridge the gap between the police and the people they served. And Evelyn? She sat in her garden, tending to her flowers, her hands steady, her heart at peace. The work wasn't over. But for now, in the warmth of the sun, with her family safe and her voice heard, it was enough.